It's April 30th here in Seoul, and I'm Kim Dami. We begin with these stories making the headlines at this hour. Starting with the first official meeting between President Yoon and main opposition leader Lee Jae-myung. President Yoon and Lee expressed their differences over policy and state affairs, but also agreed to continue their talks. The two sides also agreed on the need for a medical and pension reform. Starting today, medical professors at Severance Hospital and Seoul National University Hospital are taking a day off on Tuesdays. And medical school quota increases for the 2025 academic year are set to be determined today. Pro-Palestinian protesters at Columbia University are staying defiant even after the deadline to leave their encampments passed. Protests are also taking place at universities in France, pushing local police to break up the demonstrations. The first official meeting between President Yoon and main opposition leader Lee Jae-myung on Monday ended with no major settlement. But the two were on the same page when it came to the need for continuing their talks, as well as a medical reform for the country. Our top office correspondent Oh Soo-young reports.
President Yoon and main opposition leader Lee Jae-myung reconfirmed their differences over policy and state affairs, while also agreeing to continue their discussions. Yoon and Lee on Monday held their first official meeting since the president took office, following the ruling party's defeat in the April 10th general election, where Lee's opposition Democratic Party of Korea won a sweeping majority. With Yoon having offered to listen to all the opposition leader had to say, their tea time lasted 2 hours and 15 minutes, beginning with Lee's list of demands for political concessions. First, stressing the need to improve people's livelihoods, Lee asked Yoon to accept the DP's proposal of a 250,000 won handout, or roughly $182 to all Korean citizens, as well as the passing of a special bill to compensate victims of rental fraud. Yoon said livelihood support should be more focused on helping those in most immediate need, but the government will consult the opposition on additional measures. Another key issue or demand raised by Lee was to accept a special council probe into the death of a Marine last year, and a special act to look into the Itaewon disaster, where 159 people lost their lives as a result of a crowd crush. The DP attempted to put these bills through the National Assembly, only to have Yoon veto them, along with a special council probe into allegations of stock manipulation involving First Lady Kim Gon-hee. Lee appeared to allude to the bill, saying concerns surrounding family members should be cleared up, before asking the president to express his regret for exercising his veto on such bills. According to the top office, other than the Itaewon Act, the special bills were not discussed further. Yoon's senior press secretary Lee Do-won told reporters that to narrow their differences in approach to policy, the president suggested a bipartisan consultation body, while Lee indicated he prefers to keep negotiations within the existing framework of the National Assembly. The DP later announced it was disappointed by the meeting, as it sensed no pivot towards its demands for change. Still, the two managed to agree on the need to reform the medical system, with the opposition leader saying it is necessary to expand medical school admissions. He also said the DP will cooperate on the government's pension reform. While there was no joint statement between the two sides, Yoon and Lee agreed to continue meeting in the future in various formats as needed. Yoon has become the first president in South Korea's modern political history to serve his entire term with an opposition-led parliament.
More than anything, it is significant that the president and the opposition leader held talks for 2 hours and 15 minutes on people's livelihoods and state affairs. The meeting is seen by the top office as the first step in reaching out to the opposition.
It is too early to read the tea leaves, but the presidential office says it hopes the first tea meeting will lead to continued communication and cooperation. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
And starting today, medical professors at two of Seoul's Big Five hospitals will be taking a day off on Tuesdays. And to fill in their absences, additional public and military doctors will be dispatched. An Sung-jin has the details.
The government has decided to dispatch public health doctors and military medical doctors to help fill the void left by medical professors and junior doctors. The health authorities are reportedly going to look into the demand by Tuesday and deploy additional medical personnel if need be. While assuring there would be no major gap in medical services, The vice health minister again urged trainee doctors to return to work and professors to remain with their patients, adding that the government has a strong will to talk.
We urge doctors to actively participate in discussions to devise improvement measures. A special presidential committee on medical reform has been officially launched, and the government reaffirms its willingness to engage in one-on-one conversations with doctors.
This comes amid much concern from patients in general hospitals, as medical professors made the decision to take one day off from their duties per week. That was decided on Friday at an emergency committee meeting of professors from around 20 major medical schools nationwide. They cited prolonged fatigue after thousands of trainee doctors have been absent from their posts since late February. Professors hinted at the possibility of more than just a day off if the government confirms that there will be an increase in the medical school enrollment quota. Starting this week, the so-called Big Five hospitals will begin to halt medical services one day a week, with professors at Severance Hospital and Seoul National University Hospital taking a day off on Tuesdays, while those at Asan Medical Center and the Catholic University of Korea Seoul St. Mary's Hospital will take Fridays off. Professors at Samsung Medical Center will take voluntary days off based on their working schedule. Adding on to its plan to deploy additional medical personnel, the ministry reiterated its plan to inject a total of around $7.5 billion into surgical and internal departments by 2028. As part of such efforts, it unveiled specific plans to improve the working conditions of essential healthcare workers by increasing medical fees for interventional heart disease treatments, which will change starting the first day of June. Meanwhile, some medical schools have made their final decision on their quota increases for the 2025 academic year. Gangwon University and Chungbuk National University will increase theirs by 50%, while the University of Ulsan has chosen to raise theirs by 75%. Though these schools face protests from medical professors and students after announcing their decision, the final number will be delivered to the Korean Council for University Education on Tuesday. An Sung-jin, Arirang News.
Hopes for a ceasefire in Gaza are high, with Egypt offering a new proposal for a truce between Israel and Hamas. We're joined by Professor Austin Nupe for more. Good to have you back.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us. A Hamas delegation visited Cairo Monday for talks aimed at securing a ceasefire. Professor Nupe, can we raise our hopes that a ceasefire deal can be agreed?
One can certainly hope so. It seems the current deal will be the release of something like 35 to 40 hostages in exchange for anywhere from a 3-week to a 10-week truce, though the details are still unknown.
Well, if the deal is reached, does that mean Israeli military operations in Rafah will not take place eventually?
That's a great question, and that's the big unknown. From the Hamas's point of view, even if they agree to the terms of the ceasefire, there's no credible commitment on behalf of the Israeli Defense Force to halt or cancel the siege on Rafah. And so one of the main impediments to a hostage release deal and then a subsequent ceasefire is uncertainty around Israel's plans in the Rafah offensive in the south.
Well, the thing is, Hamas delegation visited Cairo Monday, but they said they will return with a response to the ceasefire offer. Does that mean the ceasefire will actually happen? What do you think?
So a lot depends on Hamas's central political decision-making. Ismail Haniyeh and others that have the final say on the deal. We also know that Hamas and Fatah, the Palestinian Authority, have met in Beijing, discussions over political unity among the Palestinians. And so there's several different negotiations happening all at once, which I think is a good sign. Time will tell whether or not they can agree, both parties can agree to a temporary ceasefire to increase the humanitarian aid that's much needed to the some million plus Palestinians in Rafah right now.
Right. Well, let's say a potential 10-week ceasefire is also secured. What will happen during that time? I mean, hostage exchange, prisoner swap, what's going to happen during that time?
So on the one hand, there'll be an exchange, most likely an exchange of hostages for Palestinian prisoners held by the Israelis. At the same time, there'll be an increase in humanitarian aid for basic needs, food, water, medicine, fuel for cooking, etc. And there will at the same time be international political negotiations around the Israeli Defense Forces actions in the Gaza Strip. As we know, there's an ongoing case brought by South Africa to the International Court of Justice, and there's also rumors that the International Criminal Court is going to be issuing arrest warrants for senior Israeli leaders, though the current status of that is more uncertain than the ICJ case. And so we'll see humanitarian relief, we'll see the negotiations of prisoners for hostages, and then we'll see an uptick in the delivery of basic needs and humanitarian assistance to those Palestinian civilians most in need.
Right, that leads to my next question. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is among the figures who might be named in the ICC arrest warrant. Now, how is Netanyahu reacting to this?
Well, reports indicate that he's quite stressed out or quite nervous about the prospect of being indicted.
Yeah.
Obviously, neither Israel nor the United States are signatories to the International Criminal Court, but Israel and America's European partners are. And so in the event that there's an arrest warrant that's issued, if these Israelis diplomats travel to a country that is signatory to the ICC, they risk arrest and extradition to The Hague. And so that's the major concern, not that Israel nor the United States would extradite these leaders, but they would really restrict their ability to travel internationally and engage in diplomacy.
Definitely. Then let's say Netanyahu is included in that list. What legal procedures or steps lie ahead for Netanyahu?
Well, my guess is that he would negotiate with the Americans some deal to end the war and also shield him from further legal ramifications for the war. Of course, a lot of that depends on third parties, other countries that the Israelis are negotiating with, and the risk that the Israeli delegation would travel to a European Union country, for instance, and risk being arrested and extradited. I think that that possibility is low, though it certainly is a risk that the Israeli government has to account for in the event that the ICC continues by issuing warrants.
Right, but it's not just Israeli officials. Hamas officials are highly likely to be included in the ICC arrest warrant list. Now, what would happen to Hamas officials? Just same thing?
Same thing. It would be harder to extradite Hamas militants given where they're the fact that they're in Gaza, in Qatar, in Egypt, Turkey, and elsewhere. Obviously, the ICC does not have an independent law enforcement arm. It only operates with the consent of signatory states complying with the demand to extradite those accused to stand trial. And so it's of limited effectiveness when it comes to great power conflicts, of which Israel-Hamas war is a proxy conflict involving the great powers.
All right, Professor Nube, thank you so much, as always, for your time and your insight. We appreciate it.
Appreciate it. Thanks so much for the opportunity.
The deadline has passed for pro-Palestinian protesters at Columbia University to leave their encampments. But despite threats of arrest and suspension, many remain in place. Protests were also seen at French universities. Humza has more.
2 p.m. Monday. That was the deadline given to the pro-Palestinian protesters who had set up an encampment at Columbia University in New York to protest against the dire humanitarian crisis in the Middle East and call for the university's divestment from companies with links to the Israeli occupation of Gaza. Despite threats of suspension, 80 tents and dozens of protesters remained in the encampment just after the 2 p.m. deadline. The school says only the students who remain in the encampment after the deadline would face immediate suspension, and not the hundreds of other students who have encircled the camp to protect the protesters while showing their support. The Columbia protests have inspired similar pro-Palestinian demonstrations on campuses across the country, which have led to hundreds of arrests. 6 protesters were arrested at the University of Texas at Austin on Monday, with dozens of police officers and state troopers at the scene. Around 100 protesters were arrested at Boston's Northeastern University over the weekend after police in riot gear cleared an encampment at the school. Protesters at Yale University were seen setting up a new encampment Sunday afternoon after police arrested nearly 50 protesters and cleared a camp. While protesters were warned of suspension and possible arrest, no deadline to leave the encampment was set. Similar protests were also seen at universities in France, including at Sorbonne University in Paris on Monday, where police moved in on dozens of protesters who had camped out in a courtyard in the university to demand an end to Israel's bombardment of Gaza. It follows another massive protest that broke out at the Sciences Po University in Paris last week. According to an official on Monday, funding for Sciences Po would be suspended until calm and security have been restored. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
A UN sanctions investigation team has confirmed that the remains of a missile that fell on the northeastern Ukrainian city Kharkiv in January was a North Korean ballistic missile. The 32-page report released by the UN sanctions monitors concluded the debris recovered from a missile that landed in Kharkiv on January 2nd was from a North Korean Hwasong-11 ballistic missile. The report added that while it was unable to independently confirm the missile launched, who launched the missile and from where, trajectory information provided by Ukrainian authorities suggests the missile was far from Russian territory. Now, the report comes after 3 sanctions monitors traveled to Ukraine early this month to inspect the debris. South Korea's major defense companies saw a surge in revenue in the first quarter this year, driven by government efforts to position the nation among the global defense elite. 신세벽 has more.
Major domestic defense companies in South Korea have continued to grow in the first quarter of this year. The government has ramped up its initiative to boost the defense industry's competitiveness, with an aim to rank among the top 4 global defense powerhouses. According to a synthesis of recent market expectations by securities firms and Yousaf Infomex data, the combined first quarter revenue of the 4 leading companies was estimated at 4.4 trillion won, or $3.2 billion, marking an 18% on-year increase. These companies include Hanwha Aerospace, Korea Aerospace Industries, Hyundai Rotem, and LIG Next One. Despite the revenue growth, the overall first quarter operating profit for these companies fell nearly 19% on year to around $251 million. This decline was primarily due to a decrease in high-margin sales in Poland, where recent political shifts have led to a less favorable view of imported weapon systems. Among these, Hanwha Aerospace, South Korea's largest defense company, reported a significant revenue jump of over 9% year-on-year to around $1.5 billion, but saw a sharp decline of 42.5% in operating profit. This was due in part to the absence of new shipments of K9s and Cheonggung missile systems to Poland during the first 3 months of 2024. Kai, known for producing the KF-21 supersonic fighter and F-15 light attack aircraft, posted just over $570 million in revenue and around $29 million in operating profit for the January to March period, up 38% and 102.6% respectively from the previous year. This strong performance was driven by robust exports and steady domestic demand in the aviation and aerospace sectors. Similarly, Hyundai Rotem reported a 9.3% on-year growth in revenue and 40% in operating profits, led by its K2 tank. LIG Next One saw revenue gains from its exports to Indonesia, totaling around $200 million for the quarter. However, the project's low operating profit margin of 2 to 3% had minimal impact on profit improvement, resulting in a contraction of 1.8% in Q1 operating profit. 신세벽, Arirang News.
Good morning, I'm Kim Si-young, and now we turn over to stories from around the world. We begin today in Kenya, where flash floods and a landslide on Monday killed at least 45 and injured over 110 others in and around the villages near the town of Mai Mahiu, not far from the country's capital, Nairobi. According to the Kenya Red Cross, 109 have been hospitalized, while 49 others were reported missing. Among the deaths, the Kenyan police commander said 17 of the recovered bodies were of children. The Kenyan police initially announced that the landslide and flash floods were caused by the collapse of the old Kijabe Dam. However, the Nakuru County said in a statement late Monday that the burst of water mass in a clogged river tunnel under the railway caused the floods. Heavy rains and flooding in Kenya since last month have killed over 140 people so far, with more than 185,000 residents displaced. Moving over to the United Kingdom, where Scotland's First Minister, Humza Yousaf, announced his resignation on Monday after his decision to abruptly end a power-sharing agreement between his Scottish National Party and the Green Party. The decision, coming just days after saying he had no plans to do so, angered the Green Party, and with calls for a no-confidence vote and no alternative for forming a coalition, Yousaf was under pressure to quit before being forced out. The SNP and the Greens have disagreed over climate change and gender identity issues, including Yousaf's plan to scrap Scotland's carbon emissions reduction goal. The search for a new First Minister has begun, with the SNP's John Swinney and Kate Forbes likely contenders. Yousaf became the first Muslim leader of a major UK political party after he succeeded Nicola Sturgeon 13 months ago. Iraq passed a law on Saturday that would impose heavy prison sentences and fines on gay and transgender people. The law, which was passed quietly as an amendment to an anti-prostitution law, imposes a jail sentence of 10 to 15 years for homosexual relations and 1 to 3 years for people who perform or undergo gender transition surgeries. The new law also bans any organization that promotes sexual deviancy, with a prison sentence of at least 7 years and a minimum fine of around $7,600. A previous draft version of the law that wasn't passed included allowing the death sentence for same-sex relations. The Iraqi parliament's acting speaker, Mohsen al-Mandalawi, said that the vote was a necessary step to protect the value structure of society and that the legislation can protect children from calls for moral depravity and homosexuality. The Rolling Stones, an iconic English rock band that's been active for almost 70 years, kicked off their North America tour in Houston on Sunday. The band, which formed in 1962, stars some of the eldest surviving rock stars, including 80-year-olds Mick Jagger and Keith Richards, and 76-year-old Ronnie Wood. The tour began with a performance of the 1981 classic Start Me Up, with frontman Mick Jagger dancing and skipping across the stage and showcasing his vocal range. The Houston performance was first of 16 shows confirmed across the US and Canada through July.
Good morning. The last day of April will wrap up on a pleasant spring note. Highs will be slightly lower than yesterday, but still hovering above norms. Then May 1st will start out with wide temperature differences. Mostly sunny skies will shine down on central parts of the country, but southern regions and the east coast could see 5 to 10 millimeters of rainfall. Then Gyeongsangdo and east of Jeollanam-do province will see passing rain during the day today. So grab a small umbrella in case of rain. Southern provinces will see a big jump in highs under cloudy skies. Daegu will see a high of 25 degrees Celsius, which is about 9 degrees higher than yesterday. Gwangju topping out at 22 degrees. Rain on Jeju could continue into tomorrow afternoon. Starting off hot and sunny on Children's Day weekend, that nationwide rain is in the forecast on Sunday afternoon, lingering into Monday with a drop in highs. So please plan accordingly for your long weekend. With that in mind, let's take a look at the international weather conditions.
We thank you for watching New Day at Arirang. We'll be back tomorrow for Wednesday's edition at the same time, 9 a.m. Korea time.